Who are these people?
Here's my story. We're going to talk about another Gitmo. We talked about the normal Gitmo before, Guantanamo Bay over there in Cuba, right? Where we decided to bring terrorists and torture them under, our surveillance, as well as Abu Ghraib. But that was that was the other time we did it. Look, just don't worry about it. We got all the information we wanted. Okay? So this is from Brett Wilkins over at Common Dreams, and Consortium has been, resharing his stuff recently, and he writes, an Israeli doctor blows whistle on war crimes. An anonymous physician, in a letter viewed by Haaretz, has warned Israeli officials about what's going on at a field hospital inside a notorious detention center. Now, I know this Haaretz article was a while ago, like January 6th, and so we're picking this up April 5th. It's been making new rounds. So, but he writes, a doctor at an Israeli field hospital inside a notorious detention center where hundreds of Palestinian prisoners are temporarily held is sounding the alarm about torture and horrific conditions at what some human rights defenders, including Israelis, are calling Israel's Guantanamo Bay and even a concentration camp. In a letter to Israel's Attorney General and Defense and Health Ministers viewed by Haaretz, which reported the story Thursday, the anonymous physician described likely war crimes being committed at the IDF's Side Tamines base. I hope that's how you pronounce that. Tamines? I'm sure I'm butchering that. Near Beersheba. Palestinian militants captured by IDF troops, as well as many civilian hostages ranging in age from teenagers to septuagenarians, are held there in cages, 70 to 100 per cage, until they are transferred to regular Israeli prisons or released. So I brought this video from Al Jazeera, kind of documenting some of this, just in general incarceration. So we'll check that out.
A number of Palestinian detainees have been released from the Israeli detention. They have been transferred to the Gaza Strip throughout Karm Abu Salam crossing border. As we have been talking to a number of detainees, they have been reporting about really distressing and inhuman conditions they have been going through in their detention. They have been completely deprived from having pure access to food, water, and even they have been all the time beaten by the Israeli soldiers and have receiving different signs of torture, as you can clearly see right now here on the elderly man that had been arrested by the Israeli forces in a Nasser hospital.
The Israeli soldiers stormed Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, where I was treated for a broken leg. The Israelis rounded up all patients and the injured into one section. The following day, some were transferred to Mubarak Hospital, while the rest of us, me included, were detained and loaded onto trucks and taken to another location. We were strip-searched and tortured. We were beaten all the way. The unknown location I was in had more than 2,000 Palestinian civilian detainees. We were handcuffed and blindfolded around the clock. We were subject to interrogation under torture, all forms of torture you can imagine, including use of frantic dogs. We were crammed into cells with no cover and only one meal a day. Many of the detainees died under torture. Many of the detainees have chronic disease. Others with severe injuries were treated without mercy. The detainees are going through hell. Enough is enough.
They have been reporting about inhuman violations that had been taken by the Israeli military in the detention, as more number of Palestinian people and even being detained in Israeli jails, and some of them have been taken to undisclosed location till now.
Any questions?
None.
So when people are screaming about hostages, what about these? What about these hostages?
Right.
That are
Right, and that's exactly what I've been saying.
under
It's like,
inhuman
and I had
conditions,
I've
torture.
had some Zionists say, "Oh, Israel doesn't have any hostages."
Bullshit. Bullshit. So this was what, thousands, 2,000 people he talked about, like,
Right.
that were tortured with what he said, literally any torture you could imagine, I think is what that guy said. Right? Like, including frantic dogs. So they had dogs sicked on people. Like, that's And you wonder where U.S. police officers get their ideas.
Right.
But anyway, not to get too distracted. So we continue from the first days of the medical facility's operation until today. I have faced serious ethical dilemmas. That's this doctor writing. More than that, I am writing to warn you that the facility's operations do not comply with a single section among those dealing with health in the internment of unlawful combatants law. So we'll get into that in a second. That is what they're using to kind of convict a lot of these people, right? They're just calling them combatants, because why wouldn't they? Gazans arrested and detained by Israeli forces are not legally considered prisoners of war by Israel because it does not recognize Gaza as a state. So you don't even get POW protections, right? So these detainees are mostly held under the internment of unlawful combatants law, which allows the imprisonment of anyone suspected of taking part in hostilities against Israel for up to 75 days without seeing a judge. Human Rights Watch has warned the law strips away meaningful judicial review and due process rights. That's an extreme understatement. Said Taman detainees are fed through straws and forced to defecate in diapers. They're also forced to sleep with the lights on and have allegedly been subjected to beatings and torture. Allegedly. Other Palestinians taken by Israeli forces have described being electrocuted, mauled by dogs, soaked with cold water, denied food and water, deprived of sleep, and blasted with loud music at temporary detention sites. The whistleblowing Sid Taman physician said that all patients at the camp's field hospital are, get this, Colin, handcuffed by all four limbs, regardless of how dangerous they are deemed. In December, Israeli health ministry officials ordered such treatment after a medical worker at the facility was attacked. Now the camp's estimated 600 to 800 prisoners are shackled 24 hours a day. So, what does that look like to you, Care Bear? You just saw that picture by itself. Does it not look like what you're accustomed to seeing in Germany in about 1930s, 1940s,
right.
Like that zone?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Little striped pajamas going on. That doesn't. Okay.
That just looks like a cage to me. That's looks like what you keep
yes
animals in. That's
Worse.
what it looks like to me.
You'd treat animals better than that. In Salol Ahmed, this looks like some sort of camp. That's what he's saying. I kind of agree with him. That looks exactly like concentration camp to me. Right? Like, you wouldn't need all that barbed wire for cows. You would just have a fence and be done with it. Anyway. So, this is the big shitty part of this. So, at first, the cuffs were plastic zip ties. Now they're metal. The doctor said that more than half of his patients at the camp have suffered cuffing injuries, including some that had required repeated surgical intervention. Just this week, 2 prisoners had their legs amputated due to handcuff injuries, which unfortunately is a routine event, the doctor told Haaretz. Routine event, Tom. What is routine to him? Like, how many people are getting their limbs amputated from handcuffs being too tight? And on 24 hours a day.
Right.
So, the whistleblower also alleged substandard medical care at the facility, where there was only one doctor on duty, who's sometimes a gynecologist or orthopedist. So that's what you get. Hopefully those are useful to you. So, right, even CNN had to cover this, Colin. Israeli doctor says detained Palestinians are undergoing routine amputations for handcuff injuries. And look, Fee, at when? January 6th.
Right.
Haaretz article
Not
reveals...
the January 6th.
well, yes, the one this year.
Right.
Said someone prison where Israeli detainees, thousands of prisoners from Gaza who are sleeping without any winter clothes. Prisoners are constantly blindfolded, subjected to physical torture, often handcuffed to the fence. So I wanted to find this article. It was difficult. It got like 404 and 405 and 403, and I had to like switch browsers and refresh and put in my email, and finally it let me find it. So this is from Hagar Shazaf over on Haaretz.
Commitment.
Yes. There are currently at least 661 residents of the Gaza Strip being held in Israeli prisons. 150% increase on the 260 that were being held last month. The current figure does not include Gazans held in detention at the Sid Taiman military base. Detainees in Sid Taiman are held there until the army decides where they should be imprisoned in Israel or returned to the Gaza Strip. The number of detainees being held at Sid Taiman is not known to the public. A source told Haaretz that they are exposed to violence and punishment that soldiers carry out at their own volition. These acts include beatings and handcuffing detainees to the fence or with their hands above their heads. The male detainees were initially held at Sid Taiman, with the women detainees held at Anatot. Some of the detainees on the detention centers and prisons were captured in Israel on the 7th October, and others were detained during the war in Gaza and brought to Israel. Soldiers serving as Sid Taiman punish the Palestinians if they move or talk, according to the source. Punishments include having the detainees stand with their heads cuffed above their heads, tying their hands to the fence, tightening their cuffs, or cuffing hands behind their back. The detainees are held constantly blindfolded and cuffed with plastic ties. They sleep on thin mattresses similar to yoga mats, with rough wool blankets that have no replacement clothing. The source added that one soldier beat a Palestinian who tried to peek out from beneath the blindfold. He says that the general climate at the facilities permits abuse of detainees. Testimonies by Palestinians and sources exposed to what is happening in the facility state that some of the detainees' injuries are infected. Some of the wounds were caused during the war, but others were caused at the detention facility. Most of the banded detainees were sent back to what the soldiers call cages, the places where dozens are held and where they sleep and are not hospitalized at the base's military clinic. So, I also wanted to point out this also, they were talking about the female detainees. There's definitely been stories of them being sexually assaulted multiple times at these facilities. So, and so much so that I think Israel has had to admit that that's happened. Right? So, in case you want to come yell at me over that. But, this is all, why are these detainees and not hostages? Riddle me that.
Right. And this is what Hamas is advocating for. This is why, and you can call it hard-headed. I call it standing up, and we call it shoot high in terms of negotiation. Like you don't compromise on something that you want. Yeah. Like they want all of them out. Yeah. This is what they're advocating for. And this is the stalemate that they've had since the beginning of the war. They want them out. Yeah. And Israel's like, kick rocks.
So, back to this Brett Wilkins article. So, he writes, this end in complications and sometimes even in the patient's death. Doctor said, this makes all of us, the medical teams, and you, those in charge of us in the health and defense ministries, complicit in the violation of Israeli law, and perhaps worse for me as a doctor, in the violation of my basic commitment to patients, wherever they are, as I swore when I graduated 20 years ago.
Do no harm?
Yes, that big one. The doctor claims in his letter that he warned the health ministry's director, not the Hippocratic oath, Colin, the Hippocratic oath. Let's be very, very clear there. The doctor claims in his letter that he warned the health ministry's director general about the appalling conditions at Set Taiman, but that there have been no substantial changes in the way the facility operates. As ethics committees visited the camp in February, the physician said that its members are worried about their legal exposure and coverage in view of their involvement in a facility that is operated contrary to the provisions of existing law. That legally is sufficient for you, that they don't want to be, please don't out us. That's what that is.
Right.
Right. So last month, Haaretz revealed that 27 detainees have died in custody at the Set Taiman and Anatot camps during interrogation in Israel since October 7th. While some were Hamas or other militants captured or wounded while fighting IDF troops, others were civilians, including some with pre-existing health conditions like the diabetic laborer who was not suspected of any offense when he was arrested and sent to his death in Anatot. One former Set Taiman detainee claims that he personally witnessed Israeli troops execute 5 prisoners in separate incidents. Responding to the 27 detainee deaths and invoking the U.S. military prison in Cuba known for torture and indefinite detention, the Haaretz editorial board wrote last month that Set Taiman and the other detention facilities are not Guantanamo Bay, and the state has a duty to protect the rights of detainees, even if they are not formally prisons of war. This sounds worse than Vietnam.
Yeah.
Way worse. Like, Israel's indifference to the fate of which still exists and is operating, by the way. Just wanted to keep that in mind. Like, that didn't go away. Gitmo's still around. So, Israel's indifference to the fate of Gazans at best and desire for revenge against them at worst are fertile ground for war crimes, the editor said. Indifference by Israelis and desire for revenge must not constitute license to shed the blood of detainees. The fact that Hamas is holding and abusing Israeli hostages cannot excuse or justify the abuse of Palestinian detainees. In December, the Geneva-based advocacy group Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor, which has also accused IDF troops of allowing Israeli civilians to witness the torture of Palestinian prisoners, demanded an investigation of what it called the new Guantanamo. Israeli rights groups and individuals have also condemned the abuses of Set Taiman, which, like Guantanamo, has been described as a concentration camp. Enough, just enough. We have to stop this gallop into the abyss, urged Hebrew University senior lecturer Tamar Megiddo on Wednesday. This war has to end. This government needs to end. What does that sound like, Colin? Who is he blaming?
BB.
Yep. So go check out our blame.
The ideology that it's a cause.
Blame it on the BB because it's just got to be one guy that's the problem, right? One administration is the only issue. For systemic issue, it's systemic. Okay. But that's it. Thoughts? Musings?
As you said, this is well. I'll say this: once you clip it, folks, anyone who says that Israel does not have hostages, send them this.
Yeah.
Or pull the Haaretz article that you were able to pull and send it to the Zionists.
Yeah.
And let them and see what they say. Because
it's funny that this is Israeli groups talking about it. They're like, no, this breaks our law.
Right. But again, it's the idea like they're blaming, the government / Netanyahu versus the ideology and the systemic racism, basically, that has stemmed from Zionism to perpetuate a lot of what's happening now. That's the thing that kills me. It's like, and it kills me because we do it here. We have been doing it, and we probably will continue to do it, assuming Trump is reelected. And all the issues are going to be blamed on Trump and not necessarily the system in which fed Trump to begin with.
Yeah.
So God forbid that we can't blame Zionism as a cause of all of this. But yeah, you're right. This is worse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I'm surprised this has not been. I mean, I'm surprised. Not shouldn't be, but I'm surprised this is not a bigger story as it is, because it brings up the idea of, again, this is why Hamas is basically like putting their feet in the sand and basically being like, release these prisoners here or no deal.
I'll add this to it, because this is along those blame Bibi lines, right? Where feet. I want to highlight something key. Well, Netanyahu is a soulless fool. Behind him are 30 more Netanyahus, and worse, if you can imagine it. He'll be replaced by another equally abhorrent Zionist. But the problem is, the entirety of Israel, and the majority of people who fully support what's being done to Gaza and Palestinians, apartheid and fascism cannot be voted out. The only way to defeat this is uniting and fighting against it. So, yeah, couldn't agree more. And it's why we're demonetized. So, if you want to get around that system and support us, go to codesv.com/IddyDuesNetwork, scan the QR code on your screen, or put !donate in the live chat, and you can get access to put your own little super chat, since YouTube doesn't like us having those anymore. If you can't give monetarily, you can always just like and subscribe, sharing, commenting, you know the drill by now. All those things are probably lighting up anyway, so go do those things. You know where they're at, right down below. Try to get us to 2K. See.
Who are these people?
Do you heard of this, Care Bear? I know I talked about it a bit last week.
You talked a little bit.
Yeah, we're gonna get into it a little bit. Go ahead.
No, I kind of started reading the article that you were prepping last night, but
yeah,
explain this.
So, Lavender AI is a targeting system that the Israelis created. Right, we're gonna get into how it was dreamt up. Right, but Min Press letting you know that an investigation published by 972 magazine reports that Israeli intelligence sources reveal the Israeli military used an AI system called Lavender and were given permission to kill thousands of civilians in pursuit of low-ranking Hamas members. Okay? That's where we start. So, Democracy Now! Has the author of this article. We're going to get to this article in a second, but I wanted him, they give a good intro for this, so I wanted to let him speak about it. Hold on. I gotta pause real quick. And then turn the sound on and full screen it. Cool.
Statistics, more than 50% of the casualties, more than 6,000 people at that time, came from a smaller group of families. It's an expression of, the family unit being destroyed. And I think that machine and the way it was used led to that.
Wait, that's not where it's supposed to start. Hold on. No. Play.
50% of the casualties.
Intelligence.
There we go.
This is Democracy Now!,
started
democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Israeli publications plus 972 magazine and Local Call have exposed how the Israeli military used artificial intelligence, known as Lavender, to develop a kill list in Gaza that includes as many as 37,000 Palestinians who were targeted for assassination with little human oversight. The report is based in part on interviews with 6 Israeli intelligence officers who'd firsthand involvement with the AI system. 972 reports, quote, Lavender has played a central role in the unprecedented bombing of Palestinians, especially during the early stages of the war. In fact, according to the sources, its influence on the military's operations was such that they essentially treated the outputs of the AI machine as if it were a human decision. A second AI system, known as Where's Daddy, tracked Palestinian men on the kill list. It was purposely designed to help Israel target individuals when they were at home at night with their families. One intelligence officer told the publications, quote, We were not interested in killing operatives only when they were in a military building or engaged in military activity. On the contrary, the IDF bombed them in homes without hesitation as a first option. It's much easier to bomb a family's home. The system is built to look for them in these situations, they said. Today, we spend the hour with the Israeli investigative journalist Yuval Abraham, who broke the story for 972 and Local Call. It's headlined Lavender, the AI machine directing Israel's bombing spree in Gaza. I spoke with Yuval Abraham yesterday and began by asking him to lay out what he found.
Yeah, thank you for having me again, Amy. It is a very long piece. It's 8,000 words. And we divided it into 6 different steps. And each step represents a process in the highly automated way in which the military marked targets since October. And the first finding is Lavender. So Lavender was designed by the military. Its purpose was, when it was being designed, to mark the low-ranking operatives in the Hamas and Islamic Jihad military wings. That was the intention, because Israel estimates that there are between 30 to 40,000 Hamas operatives, and it's a very, very large number. And they understood that the only way for them to mark these people is by relying on artificial intelligence, and that was the intention. Now, what sources told me is that after October 7th, the military basically made a decision that all of these tens of thousands of people are now people that could potentially be bombed inside their houses, meaning not only killing them, but everybody who was in the building, the children, the families. And they understood that in order to try to attempt to do that, they are going to have to rely on this AI machine called Lavender with very minimal human supervision. I mean, one source said that he felt he was acting as a rubber stamp on the machine's decisions. Now, what Lavender does is it scans information on probably 90% of the population of Gaza. So we're talking about, more than 1 million people. And it gives each individual a rating between 1 to 100. A rating that is an expression of the likelihood that the machine thinks, based on a list of small features, and we can get to that later, that individual is a member of the Hamas or Islamic Jihad military wings. Sources told me that the military knew, because they took a random sampling and checked one by one, the military knew that approximately 10% of the people that the machine was marking to be killed were not Hamas militants. They were not. Some of them had a loose connection to Hamas. Others had completely no connection to Hamas. I mean, one source said how the machine would bring people who had the exact same name and nickname as a Hamas operative, or people who had similar communication profiles, like it could be civil defense workers, police officers in Gaza. And they implemented, again, minimal supervision on the machine. One source said that he spent 20 seconds per target before authorizing the bombing of the alleged low-ranking Hamas militant. Often it was also a civilian, killing those people inside their houses. And I think the reliance on artificial intelligence here to mark those targets, and basically the deadly way in which the officers spoke about how they were using the machine, could very well be part of the reason why in the first 6 weeks after October 7th, like one of the main characteristics of the policies that were in place were entire Palestinian families being wiped out inside their houses. I mean, if you look at UN statistics, more than 50% of the casualties, more than 6,000 people at that time, came from a smaller group of families. It's an expression of the family unit being destroyed. And I think that machine and the way it was used led to that.
So, any questions before we get started?
So basically, this is. I keep going back to those drones.
Yeah. Yep. It's in some ways worse than that, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's like a person doesn't even have to necessarily, from what I understand, a person doesn't necessarily have to control it. The AI does it on its own.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, they rubber stamped the Air Force using their own, this is just targeting, right? So, right. But we're going to get into it. So I brought this article. Again, he said it was 8,000 words. I've linked it down in the description. We're not going to go through quite all of it. But I tried to pull the important parts for people. So we're going to go a bit more in depth. So in 2021, a book titled The Human Machine Team: How to Create Synergy Between Human and Artificial Intelligence That Will Revolutionize Our World was released in English under the pen name Brigadier General Y.S. In it, the author, a man who we confirmed to be the current commander of the elite Israeli intelligence unit 8200, makes the case for designing a special machine that could rapidly process massive amounts of data to generate thousands of potential targets for military strikes in the heat of war. Such technology, he writes, would resolve what he described as a human bottleneck for both locating the new targets and decision-making to improve the targets. Such a machine, it turns out, actually exists. So that machine's called Lavender, which is a nice flowery name for it. But it's just essentially humans couldn't kill fast enough for them. So we got to make robots to target them. So the result, as the sources testified, is that thousands of Palestinians, most of them women and children, are people who were not involved in the fighting or wiped out by Israeli airstrikes, especially during the first week of the war, because of the AI program's decisions. We were not interested in killing Hamas operatives only when they were in a military building or engaged in a military activity, an intelligence officer told 972. On the contrary, the IDF bombed them in homes without hesitation as a first option. It's much easier to bomb a family's home. The system is built to look for them in these situations. The Lavender machine joins another AI system, the Gospel, about which information was revealed in a previous investigation by 972 and local call.
Literally, oh my God.
Yes. In November, as well as the Israeli military's own publication, a fundamental difference between the two systems is the definition of the target. Whereas the Gospel marks buildings and structures that the army claims militants operate from, Lavender marks people and puts them on a kill list. Yay! Isn't it? Don't you love learning about man-made horrors? It's great. It's just the best. So, in addition, according to the source, when it came to targeting alleged junior militants, what do you think that means? Junior militants.
Child soldiers.
Yes. Marked by Lavender, the army preferred to only use unguided missiles, commonly known as dumb bombs, in contrast to smart precision bombs, which can destroy entire buildings on top of their occupants and cause significant casualties. Well, you don't want to waste expensive bombs on unimportant people.
Kids.
It's very expensive for the country, and there's a shortage of those bombs. Said C, one of the intelligence officers. Another source said that they had personally authorized the bombing of hundreds of private homes and alleged junior officers marked by Lavender, with many of these attacks killing civilians and entire families as collateral damage.
So this just kind of confirms that they just consider everyone Hamas.
Well, we're gonna
junior operatives.
Oh, they have a formula. It's not even. So, in an unprecedented move, according to two of the sources, the army also decided during the first week of the war, for every junior Hamas operative that Lavender marked, it was permissible to kill up to 15 to 20 civilians. In the past, the military did not authorize any collateral damage. During assassinations of low-ranking militants, the sources added that in the event that the target was a senior Hamas official with the rank of battalion or brigade commander, the army on several occasions authorized the killing of more than 100 civilians in the assassination of a single commander. I mean, I feel like they're just telling on themselves here.
Yes.
Which they literally are. The sources said that the approval to automatically adopt Lavender's kill list, which had previously been used only as an auxiliary tool, was granted about 2 weeks into the war, after intelligence personnel manually checked the accuracy of random sample of several hundred targets selected by the AI system. When that sample found that Lavender's results had reached 90% accuracy. Okay, so this is in a 2-week span, right? They alleged that this had 90% accuracy, right? In identifying an individual's affiliation with Hamas. The army authorized the sweeping use of the system. From that moment, sources said that if Lavender decided an individual was a militant in Hamas, they were essentially asked to treat that as an order with no requirement to independently check why the machine made that choice or to examine the raw intelligence data on which it's based. At 5 a.m., the Air Force would come and bomb all the houses that we marked, he said. We took out thousands of people. We didn't go through them one by one. We put everything into automated systems, and as soon as one of the marked individuals was at home, he immediately became a target. We bombed him and his house. It was very surprising for me that we were asked to bomb a house to kill a ground soldier whose importance in the fighting was so low, said one source. About the use of AI to mark alleged low-ranking militants, I nicknamed those targets garbage targets. Still, I found them more ethical than the targets that we bombed just for deterrence. High-rises that are evacuated and toppled just to cause destruction. The deadly results of this loosening of restrictions in the early stage of the war was staggering, according to data from the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza, on which the Israeli army had relied almost exclusively since the beginning of the war. Israel killed some 15,000 Palestinians, almost half of the death toll so far, in the first 6 weeks of the war, up until a week-long ceasefire was agreed on November 24th. The Lavender software analyzes information collected on most of the 2.3 million residents of the Gaza Strip through a system of mass surveillance, then assesses and ranks the likelihood that each particular person is active in the military wing of Hamas or PIJ. According to sources, the machine gives almost every single person in Gaza a rating from 1 to 100, expressing how likely it is that they are a militant. Lavender learns to identify characteristics of known Hamas and PIJ operatives whose information was fed to the machine as training data, and then to locate these same characteristics, also called features, among the general population. Sources explained, an individual found to have several different incriminating features will reach a high rating and thus automatically becomes a potential target for assassination. In the Human Machine Team, the book referenced at the beginning of this article, the current commander of Unit 8200 advocates for such a system without referencing Lavender by name. The commander himself also isn't named, but 5 sources in 8200 confirm the commander is the author, as reported also by Haaretz, describing human personnel as a bottleneck that limits the Army's capacity during a military operation. We humans cannot process so much information. It doesn't matter how many people you have tasked to produce targets during the war, you still cannot produce enough targets per day. The book isn't the only time a senior Israeli commander hinted at the existence of human targeted machines like Lavender. 972 and Local Call have obtained footage of a private lecture given by the commander of Unit 8200's Secret Data Science and AI Center, Colonel Yov, at Tel Aviv University AI Week in 2023, which was reported on at the time in the Israeli media. In the lecture, the commander speaks about a new, sophisticated target machine used by the Israeli army that detects dangerous people based on their likeness to existing lists of known militants on which it was trained. Using the system, we managed to identify Hamas missile squad commanders, Colonel Yoav said in the lecture, referring to Israel's May 2021 military operation in Gaza when the machine was used for the first time. So, the lecture contains illustrations of how the machine works. It's fed data, right? Learns to notice their features, and then it rates other Palestinians based on how similar they are to the militants. We rank the results and determine the threshold at which to attack a target. Yov said in the lecture, emphasizing that eventually people of flesh and blood take the decisions. In the defense realm, ethically speaking, we put a lot of emphasis on this. These tools are meant to help intelligence officers break their barriers. In practice, however, sources who have used Lavender in recent months say human agency and precision were substituted by mass target creation and lethality. So, senior officer who used Lavender echoed to 972 and Local Call that in the current war, officers were not required to independently review the AI system assessment. In order to save time, enable the mass production of human targets without hindrances, everything was statistical. Everything was neat. It was very, very dry. B said he noted that this lack of supervision was permitted despite internal checks showing that Lavender's calculations were considered accurate only 90% of the time. In other words, It was known in advance that 10% of the human targets slated for assassination were not members of Hamas. Right? So, for example, sources explain that Lavender machines sometimes mistakenly flagged individuals who had communications patterns similar to Hamas, including police and civil defense workers, militants' relatives, residents who happen to have a name and nickname identical to that of operative, and Gazans who used a device that once belonged to a Hamas operative. So you pick up a cell phone on the ground, you could then be bombed, is what that sounds like. So, so similar problems exist with the ability of target machines to assess the phone used by an individual marked for assassination. In war, Palestinians change phones all the time, said the source. People lose contact with their families, give their phone to a friend or wife, maybe lose it. There's no way to rely 100% on the automatic mechanism that determines which phone number belongs to whom. According to the sources, the army knew that the minimal human supervision in place would not discover these faults. There was no zero-error policy. Mistakes were treated statistically, said a source who used Lavender because of the scope and magnitude. The protocol was that even if you don't know for sure that the machine is right, you know that statistically it's fine, so you go for it. In a statement to 972, the IDF spokesman claimed in response to this article that Hamas places its operatives and military assets in the heart of civilian population. Isn't that nice? The 6 sources we spoke to echoed this to some degree, saying that Hamas' extensive tunnel system deliberately passes under hospitals and schools. So this is their excuse for using this, right? So, yeah, the sources argue that many Israeli strikes kill civilians as a result of these tactics by Hamas, a characterization that human rights groups warns evades Israel's onus for inflicting the casualties. So, in contrast, the Israeli army's official statements, the sources explained that a major reason for the unprecedented death toll from Israel's current bombardment is the fact that the army has systematically attacked targets in their private homes alongside their families, in part because it was easier from an intelligence standpoint to mark family houses using automated systems. Indeed, several sources emphasize that, as opposed to numerous cases of Hamas operatives engaging in military activity from civilian errors, in the case of systemic assassination strikes, the army routinely made the active choice to bomb suspected militants when inside a civilian household from which no military activity took place. This choice, they said, was a reflection of the way Israel's system of mass surveillance in Gaza is designed. So,
which is bullshit.
Yeah. So we're going to get into Where's Daddy now. I think this is one of the things I brought up.
Yeah,
right?
Mentioned, yeah.
So, in order to identify the moment operatives entered their houses in real time, various additional automatic softwares have been developed. These programs track thousands of individuals simultaneously, identify when they are at home, and send an automatic alert to the targeting officer, who then marks the house for bombing. One of several of these tracking softwares revealed here for the first time is called Where's Daddy? You put hundreds of targets into the system and wait to see who you can kill, said one source with knowledge of the system. It's called broad hunting. You copy-paste from the list that the target system produces. So, Caitlin Johnston, one of our favorites, wanted to make sure that we understood some of this, right? So one aspect of the recent revelations about the IDF's Lavender system that's not getting enough consideration is the fact that it is completely devastating to the narrative that Israel has been killing so many civilians because Hamas uses human shields. If you missed this story, a major report from 972 revealed that Israel has been using an AI system called Lavender, right, to kill lists of suspected members of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which have been carried out with hardly any human verification. One automated system, psychopathically named Where's Daddy, tracks suspects to their homes so that they could be killed with their entire families. The IDF has been knowingly killing 15 to 20 civilians at a time to kill one Hamas operative, and up to 100 civilians at a time to take out a senior official, right? The human shields narrative that's become so popular in Israel apologia insists that the reason the IDF kills so many civilians in its attack on Gaza is because Hamas intentionally surrounds itself with non-combatants as a strategy to make the innocent Israelis reluctant to drop bombs on them. But as The Intercept's Ryan Grimm recently observed on Twitter, and she mentions Abby Martin too, we covered Robert Inkelesh covering that, I do believe, right? The human shields narrative. This is soundly refuted by the revelation that Israel has been intentionally waiting to target suspected Hamas members when it knows they're surrounded by civilians. So, Israel's argument that kills so many civilians because Hamas uses human shields is torn apart by the revelation that the IDF prefers to attack its targets when they are home with their families. Tweeted Grimm, it's not Hamas using human shields, it is Israel deliberately hunting families.
Right.
A human shield is... Yeah.
Yeah, so basically it's the idea of like, if we take down a Hamas operative and they're with their families, and God forbid if there are other people around them, so be it.
Yep. So a human shield is only a shield if your enemy values human life and seeks to minimize civilian death. Israel deliberately maximizes the number of civilians it can kill by waiting until a target is with his entire family. Palestinians are not shields to Israel. They are all targets. This is such an important point. Advocates for Palestine like Abby Martin have for years been presenting compelling arguments against Israel's human shields claims, and common sense shows that the presence of civilians is clearly not a deterrent to Israeli airstrikes. Because of these 972 revelations, the lie has now been thoroughly, irrefutably debunked. Civilians aren't getting killed because Hamas hides behind them. Civilians are getting killed because the IDF waits until suspected Hamas members are on civilians to target them with high-powered military explosives. So, yeah. She mentions the Prime Minister Golda Meir quote, someday we may be able to forgive the Arabs for killing our children, but we will never forgive them for making us kill their children. Right? Which is just the worst quote.
Are you going to forgive the Germans for killing yours?
No. So Caitlin writes, you see this quote pop up all the time in varying iterations, shared approvingly by Israel apologists around the world as though it's something wise and brilliant instead of a horrific defense of murdering children. But it turns out this morally depraved quote isn't even true by the most generous of interpretations. Israel isn't being forced to kill Palestinian children. It is knowingly choosing to. The human shields narrative is just one more instance in which Israel pretends to be the victim while actually being the victimizer. They lied about beheaded babies so they could get away with murdering babies. They lied about mass rape so that they could get away with committing rape. They lied about Hamas using civilians as human shields so that they could kill civilians.
So they can kill them.
Yep, the lie about being victims so that they can victimize.
Right.
So, I have a little bit more, and then we'll finish up with Richie. So, evidence of this policy is also clear from the data. During the first month of war, half of the fatalities, 6,000 people or so, belonged to 1,000 families, many of which were completely wiped out while inside their homes, according to UN figures. The proportion of entire families bombed in their homes in the current war is much higher than in the 2014 Israeli operation in Gaza. Oh, that's funny, before October 7th, interesting. Which is previously Israel's deadliest war on the Strip, further suggesting the prominence of this policy. Another source said that each time the pace of assassinations waned, more targets were added to systems like Where's Daddy to locate individuals that entered their homes and could therefore be bombed. He said that the decision of who to put into the tracking system could be made by relatively low-ranking officers in the military hierarchy. One day, totality of my own accord, I adding something like 1,000 new targets to the tracking system because the number of attacks we were conducting decreased, the source said. That made sense to me. In retrospect, it seems like a serious decision I made, and such decisions were not made at high levels. The sources said in the first 2 weeks of the war, several thousand targets were initially inputted into locating programs like Where's Daddy that included all the members of Hamas's elite special forces unit, the Nukba, all of Hamas's anti-tank operatives, and anyone who entered Israel on October 7th. But before long, the kill list was drastically expanded. In the end, it was everyone. Marked by lavender, one source explained, tens of thousands. This happened a few weeks later when the Israeli brigade entered Gaza, and there were already fewer uninvolved people, i.e. civilians in the northern area. According to this source, even some minors were marked by Lavender as targets for bombing. Normally, operatives are over the age of 17, but that was not a condition. One source said that when attacking junior operatives, including those marked by AI systems like Lavender, the number of civilians they were allowed to kill alongside each target was fixed during the initial weeks of the war, up to 20. Another source claimed the fixed number was up to 15. These collateral damage degrees, as the military calls them, were applied broadly to all suspected junior militants, the sources said, regardless of their rank, military importance, and age, with no specific case-by-case examination to weigh. So, according to A, who is an officer in a target operation room in the current war, the Army's International Law Department has never before given such sweeping approval for such a high collateral damage degree. It's not just that you can kill any person who is a Hamas soldier, which is clearly permitted and legitimate in terms of international law, but they directly tell you you are allowed to kill them along with many civilians. Every person who wore a Hamas uniform in the past year or two could be bombed with 20 civilians as collateral damage, even without special permission. A continued, in practice, the principle of proportionality did not exist. So Amjad al-Sheikh, a young Palestinian from Gaza, said many of these family members were killed in that bombing. A resident of Shujaiya, east of Gaza City, he was at a local supermarket that day when he heard 5 blasts that shattered glass windows. I ran to my family's house, but there was no building there anymore. Al-Sheikh told 972. The street was filled with screams and smoke. Entire resident blocks. Where'd I go? This way. Sorry. Al-Sheikh told 972 the street was filled with screams and smoke. Entire residence blocks turned to mountains of rubble and deep pits. People began to search in the cement using their hands, and so did I, looking for signs of my family home. Al-Sheikh's wife and baby daughter survived, protected from the rubble by a closet that fell on top of them. But he found 11 other members of his family among them, his sisters, brothers, their young children, dead under the rubble. According to the human rights group B'Tselem, the bombing that day destroyed dozens of buildings, killed dozens of people, and buried hundreds under the ruin of their homes. The sources who spoke to 972 explained that there was sometimes a substantial gap between the moment the tracking systems, like Where's Daddy, alerted an officer that a target had entered their house, and the bombing itself, leading to the killing of whole families, even without hitting the Army's target. It happened to me many times that we attacked a house, but the person wasn't even home, one source said. The result is that he killed a family for no reason. Sometimes the target was at home earlier, and then at night he went to sleep somewhere else, say underground, and you didn't know about it, one of the sources said. There are times when you double-check the location, and there are times when you just say, okay, he was in the house in the last few hours, so you can just bomb. Another source described a similar incident that affected him and made him want to be interviewed for this investigation. We understood that the target was home at 8 p.m. In the end, the Air Force bombed the house at 3 a.m. Then we found in the span of that time he had managed to move himself to another house with his family. There were 2 other families with children in the building we bombed. So, anything to say before I let Richie close us out?
I think, again, I keep thinking of those damn drones.
I know.
But it's just the idea of, like, thank you for putting that in my head.
Yeah.
But, so basically, it just sounds like, to me, I think it just became to a point where it's just indiscriminate in terms of, I could plug it, well, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just so I can understand it. So, like, a lower level IDF soldier can plug in, I want to target you, for example, and, like, maybe because you looked at me the wrong way or what.
Right.
And then...
Yeah, all you got to do is connect it to another lower level Hamas militant. in some way or fashion, you know, and you'd be fine to add that, and then that target, and then you would turn into a Hamas militant, you know, like, and they would just kill your family.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I mean, that was like from 8 a.m. and then they went out at 3 a.m. Like, that's a big gap. 8 and 3, you know. So 8 p.m. to 3 a.m., whatever it was. But, yep, Richie's got some closing thoughts as well. You know, he covered this. I'm only going to play a little bit of it, and then we'll head out of here. So let's see what Richie has to say.
With Pegasus, and yeah, Pegasus is real, no question about that. But the Israelis have cultivated an image about themselves which serves them. It demoralizes people. They can sell cyber weapons, etc. Right? So you shouldn't buy into it too much. And where's the proof that they're not as hot shit as they say they are? October 7th.
That's the end. Why is it doing that? It's like not getting my start times. Hold on.
You know, let me. This is a very, very long article, and I sat down the whole day going through it, adding notes, and I've just given you the gist of it. There's no need for me to go any further, but I'll just add a few last points. The Israelis have always behaved like this. This is their policy. They were brutal in 48. They were brutal even before that, right? And they were brutal in 56, and then also in 67 and in 72. They've always been brutal 24/7, and so they have turned a machine into a they basically made this AI just as brutal as them and automated the process. That's it. One other point that I would add is that this could be a psyop. What do I mean by a psyop? A psyop is an abbreviation. It basically means a psychological operation that it's meant to demoralize the other side, right? So this could be the Israelis feeding the journalists a bunch of rubbish. I don't think so, but we're contemplating. This could be the Israelis feeding the journalists a bunch of rubbish about lavender so that they make Hamas feel demoralized. Like, oh crap, they're going to kill us with our families. They're going to target us, this machine, this robot killer. It could be. But I'll also add another point. The Israelis always love to pretend that they're hot shit, you know, with technological and electronic in the tech and electronic domains. What do I mean by this? For example, when they killed a nuclear scientist in Iran, they then told the New York Times how they smuggled a gun into Iran, and then it was an automated gun that killed him. I mean, who the hell knows if that's true? We don't know if that's true. Also, this thing with, like, you know, how they know how to hack everyone with Pegasus. And yeah, Pegasus is real, no question about that. But the Israelis have cultivated an image about themselves which serves them. It demoralizes people. They can sell cyber weapons, etc. Right? So you shouldn't buy into it too much. And where's the proof that they're not as hot shit as they say they are? October 7th.
Well, anything to say? I mean, I think we covered it.
I mean, again, I felt like you primed me for this.
Yep.
For other segments before, but but my question is, who created this technology? Like, is it Israel? Is it the US? Is it like, because honestly, I can't imagine the US just being like doing this on their own. So
no, I mean, we probably have our own.
Like, that's what I'm wondering. Is like,
place,
who created this tech?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of you know, clearly Israel wants to claim it as their own, probably so that they can sell it. But I imagine they had some help if it is real, and you know, if it has the capabilities they're saying it does. But yeah, I don't know. But you know, I'm sure if we weren't demonetized already, YouTube would definitely do it for talking about it. You can go to kodashv.com/Indie News Network to get around that system, or scan the QR code on your screen. If you're tired of the YouTube system, you can go to Rockfin and Rumble, link in the description below, and support us on other platforms. You know, but you can always just like and subscribe. Sharing also helps a ton. You know, leaving a comment supposedly helps. You know, help us get to 2K subs. We're getting there. We're like 1.9 something now, right? I do believe.
1906.
are these people?
Speaking of Lazarus, you brought this.
So we're going to get a little theological for this segment. So I got really inspired. This happens with me sometimes. We've noticed this very well. Zionism has been thrown around a lot, especially in the last few months, given what's happening in Gaza. But I think often we think about Zionism in terms with Judaism and not so much in terms of how, one, you don't have to be Jewish to be Zionist. And we know this from Biden, has declared himself to be a raging Zionist, and he's Catholic, allegedly. So we don't necessarily talk about Zionism on the Christian aspect of the ideology. And having grown up in the church, not to say I got like full on into the whole Israel thing.
Well, I know I got to it around the Bush years, right? There was a giant evangelical block of the electorate at the time, right? That the Republicans were definitely catering to, right? At that moment in time, which they still do. This is still part of the problem. But I remember documentaries and stuff then explaining about this, right? Where, you know, there's this end times myth, right? Of, you know, you have to have the Jews in Israel fighting a holy war, right? For Jesus to come back. Right. We're
gonna get into that. So
Jesus is the bread.
He is the bread, Colin. He's the bread.
So
his blood is the wine, which that's not weird at all to be drinking blood. You know, like, also how much fucking alcohol that man drink if his blood alcohol is fucking 6.2, you know, Bordeaux, homie. You know what I mean? Like, and as someone who's had communion wine, couldn't they get a better wine? Why is that shit gross?
Well, it can't be like expensive wine.
You can get good cheap wine. That's a thing.
Yeah, but it depends. Like, depending on the congregation, it may not be worth.
Put me some fucking Zinfandel in there, dog. Something. You know, like shit. Well, they passed that collection plate around a lot, Colin. I bet they can afford some fucking better wine. And these stupid crackers? What are these? Like, give me some real bread, dog. You know? Anyway. Sorry, I'm just ranting about Southern Communion being terrible, bro. And don't laugh when they pull out the Wonder Bread as communion bread. Don't fucking laugh at that shit. That is not good.
Not a Wonder Bread.
Dipping it in grape juice, bro. Bro, I've been there. It's fucking hard in the South, all right? Hard.
All right, so let's get into it. So this article is from Trufelt. This was actually written 3 years ago by Jonathan Brenman and Aidan Orley, op-ed piece. And they write, progressives can't ignore the role of Christian Zionism in colonization of Palestine. The forced displacement of Palestinians is funded by the millions of dollars Christian Zionists send to Israel yearly. So again, we talk more about the Israeli lobby in recent months regarding their finances and how their finances have helped to kind of spear a lot of policy, almost to the detriment of other people, but we don't talk about Christian Zionists and the role they play. So let's get into it. Over the past several weeks, the world has witnessed Palestinians continuing to resist forced displacement, apartheid, and brutal military occupation. Now, keep in mind, this was 3 years ago. So I guess, you know, like they've been talking about apartheid prior to October 7th, right, Reeve?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
there have been outcries around the world calling for solidarity and to hold the Israeli government accountable. Again, they were talking about this back then. Missing in a lot of the circulating narratives, however, is the indisputable role that the powerful Christian Zionist movement plays, both now and in the long and bloody history of the colonization of Palestine. Christian Zionists are leading a call for the U.S. to unconditionally support Israel's expulsion of Palestinians in Jerusalem and Israel's bombing of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Christian Zionist leaders regularly characterize Palestinian resistance to their displacement as Jew hatred, appropriating anti-Semitism to hinder Palestinian rights. Recently, John Hagee, that's that guy in the picture there, the chairman and founder of Christian United for Israel, the largest pro-Israel lobby in the US, probably at the time, tweeted that Jerusalem and Israel belong to the Jewish people and encouraged Christians to take a stand against evil and show unconditional love and support for Israel. Christian Zionism is by far the largest movement supporting authoritarian policies in the Israeli government outside of Israel, an essential bloc within the larger US Christian right. The most politically active Christian Zionist movements are motivated primarily by the belief that Jews taking control over the biblical land of Israel will bring about Jesus' second coming and the end of the world, when Christians will reach salvation and non-Christians, including Muslims and Jews, will be annihilated. So, but no one talks about that. Like
another thing that I'm trying to remember the name of this book. I think it's called The Other Side: The Secret Relationship Between Nazism and Zionism. Heard of this? Okay, so I will go to the thesis of the book. Right, this is put together by a guy named Abbas. Right, working with a Russian guy, I do believe. The thesis of the book is that the Zionist movement and its leaders were the partners of the Nazis in planning and carrying out the Holocaust. He builds the case of the Havara Arrangement of 1933, in which the Third Reich agreed with the Jewish agency to enable Jews to immigrate from Germany directly to mandatory Palestine, which he sees as evidence of collaboration. So that's how far this goes back. Right? Is that, the Zionist movement led a broad campaign of incitement against the Jews living under Nazi rule to arouse the government's hatred of them, to fuel vengeance. Right? So
I would argue, though, and given within the article, it goes even farther back than the 1940s, actually.
Right. Every racist in the world was given the green light, and first and foremost, Hitler and the Nazis to do with the Jews as they wish, as long as it ensures Jewish immigration to Palestine. That was some of this. So,
right.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's continue. These end-time theologies have roots in 16th century Protestantism in Europe and reflect the colonial context in which they were formed. Christian Zionism as a political movement gained traction as part of the 19th century fundamentalist movement in Britain and the US when figures such as Lord Shaftesbury, John Nelson Darby, and William Blackstone began proselytizing the end times prophecy and conjuring up ideas of a Jewish homeland in Palestine decades before prominent Jewish Zionists called for the same. Britain's Arthur Balfour, whose Balfour Declaration promised a Jewish homeland in Palestine, we did a segment on him maybe like 4 weeks ago, was himself a noted Christian Zionist, as was President Woodrow Wilson, who co-signed the declaration at the encouragement of Jewish Zionist Supreme Court Judge Louis Brandeis. Jewish Zionism is a newer development than Christian Zionism, but alliances were formed between the majority Ashkenazi Jewish Zionists in Europe seeking a Jewish state and the Christian Zionists who were located in the highest offices in the US and British governments. Indeed, it was Christian Zionists who had the imperial and military power necessary to occupy and colonize Palestine at the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And it was the League of Nations, which is the predecessor to the United Nations, led by Western Christian majority powers, who ultimately partitioned Palestine and Israel. No doubt, Christian Zionist leaders viewed the displacement of Jews out of Europe into Palestine as a convenient solution to the Jewish question, whereby the Jewish state would serve as a proxy for Western imperial interests in a geopolitically strategic region, and Jewish bodies used as a sword and shield against a centuries-old Muslim enemy. The colonization of Palestine is rooted in and largely continues to serve Western Christian imperialist interests at the expense of Palestinians, Muslims, and Jews. And we're going to go a little bit more about that in terms of the colonization and the imperialist aspect of this later.
Gotcha.
But even in this article, they kind of mentioned that it's based around, I'll say it, white supremacy, essentially.
The caucasity.
The caucasity, sure. Many Christian Zionists today view the 1948 establishment of the State of Israel, which created the Nakba, or expulsion of about 750,000 Palestinians, as a fulfillment of biblical end times prophecy. The Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights beginning in 1967 similarly is interpreted as a sign that God is blessing Israel and paving the way for Jesus' return. Subsequent wars, invasions, and offensives have been seen as escalating measures that foreshadow the end times that will bring Christians into salvation and annihilate non-Christians. In other words, Christian Zionism responds positively to conflict, in particular Israeli state aggression towards Palestinians. Just think about this like in terms of Mike Johnson right now. Like,
I'm thinking about it in the terms of
like
in
he's
high school
doing this, basically.
Senior year of my high school, so story time. Me and my buddies, so there was that, do you remember when they were like saying the rapture was gonna happen in like 2011, right? 2010, around there, right? It's one of those end times myths. Some Florida preacher or whatever knew it was coming, right? And anyway, me and my friends decided what we'd do is we'd all pool together old sets of clothes, right? And we went out and laid out clothes like the people wearing the clothes had just been raptured the night before. And it was the most hilarious thing I've ever done. It was like got in the newspaper the next morning, you know, and we had this like fountain in the middle of town, right? It was really like a roundabout to get anywhere in town. And like we poured soap in that, you know, like that powdered detergent or whatever. So it was just bubbles everywhere. It was great, you know. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking about it as. I remember that's.
But it kind of makes sense given mostly Republicans, but then some Democrats as well, who claim Christianity, especially if they're more the evangelical band, how they vote.
Yes.
So, because there's a lot of Christian Zionism in terms of that too. So
it's why AIPAC needed to go talk to Trump and make sure he was on board.
Exactly. And for all intents and purposes, even though Trump, I mean, he claims, I'll argue nominally like Christian, probably, and I can argue Biden too, but you know, kind of plays along with this as well. So anyway, let's see, where was I? In other words, Christian Zionism responds positively to conflict, in particular Israeli state aggression towards Palestinians. Regard for Palestinian life and land, including Palestinian Christians, is absent from Christian Zionism, since Jewish rule over Palestine is key to unlocking the end times. Today, Christian Zionists are estimated to number at least in the tens of millions, far greater than the population of world Jewry. In U.S., Christian Zionists are the most numerous and the most right-wing voting bloc for Israel. The largest Christian Zionist organization, CUIF, boasts 10 million members, far eclipsing the 100,000 members belonging to AIPAC, the much more famous pro-Israel lobbying organization. So, so we talk about AIPAC being a big deal, and I don't think we necessarily talk about the CUIF at all, but they're making the argument, no, they're even bigger than that. So, one out of every 4 adults in the United States identifies as evangelical Christian, and 80% of evangelical Christians, or 20% of the U.S. population, reportedly believe the gathering of millions of Jews by the state of Israel signifies the nearing of Jesus' second coming. The power of Christian Zionism in the U.S. is summed up in a recent interview with Ron Dermer, a close ally of Israeli right-wing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a former Israeli ambassador to the United States. And he says, the backbone of Israel's support in the United States is evangelical Christians. It's true because of numbers and also because of their passionate and unequivocal support for Israel. About 25% of Americans, some people think more, are evangelical Christians. Less than 2% of Americans are Jews.
What about the 10%?
If you look at just...
What about the 10%?
Oh. If you look just at numbers, you should be spending a lot more time doing outreach to evangelical Christians than you would to Jews. But also look at the passionate support. For the most evangelicals in the United States, certainly for many of them, Israel is one of the most important issues to them. For some, it's number 1. For others, it may be number 2 or number 3. It's very rare to hear evangelicals criticize Israel. Many of the most egregious and anti-Palestinian policies. What's that?
I can probably zoom in. There you go.
I was able to see it before, but thank you for doing it. Many of the most egregious and anti-Palestinian policies by the United States are led by Christian Zionists. Former President Donald Trump's foreign policy on Israel was largely appeasing his evangelical Christian base, who voted for him at a margin of 4-1. On the other hand, a much smaller number of American Jews, somewhere between 21% and 30%, voted for Trump. Christian Zionists occupy the highest office of the Trump administration. Remember, this was written back in 2021, including former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Vice President Mike Pence. And Trump's 4 years in office saw dramatic right-wing shifts in U.S. policy on Israel, including the cutting of U.S. funding to the UNRWA, the agency responsible for supporting Palestinian refugees, recognizing Israel's illegitimate claims to the Golan Heights, moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal.
Which we covered.
Netanyahu's right. What's that?
We covered that.
Yeah.
Like way back in the day. It's one of our first tie-in news.
One of our first, yeah.
Yeah.
Shows, yeah. Bibi's right-wing government had wanted to institute some of these changes for years, but it was only because of the Trump administration and his Christian Zionist base that Netanyahu was finally able to do so. So, actually, let me keep reading and then I'll say what I gotta say. While most Christian Zionist money flows through churches and is therefore difficult to track, Christian Zionist funding sends millions of dollars annually to Israel, including to support Jewish immigration to Israel and right-wing Israeli organizations and settlements in service of their goals of regathering the Jews, Palestinian displacement, and greater Israeli control. So, Bibi ain't worried at all, about Trump. I think that could be said, already. But it's basically win-win for Bibi, assuming that he stays in power through the end of the year and assuming that Trump becomes president by the end of the year. So yes, the argument can be had that Trump will be way worse on Israel and way more upfront about it. but that doesn't give the excuse to say of Biden what he's doing is any better, especially him being complicit in a genocide and seemingly both sizing the issue on that, trying to kind of make nice with Arab/Muslim Americans, but then continuing to send weapons to Israel and not following through with the ICC, wanting to give Bibi the business that, we're basically, saying
we talked
don't
about
do that.
We talked about what? That they wanted to blame everything on Bibi anyway, right? We covered that not that long ago from Caitlin Johnstone, right? To where now, the minute that the ICC goes, well, let us arrest the asshole and all the other assholes, they're at the top of this. They're like, no, wait, hold on a second. Like,
right.
We didn't mean actually blame them. We just meant like figuratively blame them. Blame them in your mind.
Right. So this is why I tell people rhetoric is just that, rhetoric. What your actions and behavior should mark you as a person. So the idea, as you said, then not moving in terms of the rhetoric that they seem are by making themselves tough Netanyahu. But anyway, why CUIF does not constitute President Biden's base of support. Christian Zionism is shifting the U.S. conversation on Palestine as the movement continues to grow. The Biden administration restored to the UNRWA, but will not reverse many of Trump's other Christian Zionist influenced policies, including the U.S. Embassy move to Jerusalem, despite having been major departures from decades of U.S. foreign policy. CUIF has grown to 10 million members from just 2 million in 2015, and Christian evangelicalism is believed to be one of the fastest growing religions in the world, forming an even larger base of U.S. and global political and financial support for Israel's right wing. Current U.S. Israeli aggression towards Palestinians is an outgrowth of long-held Israeli Jews, especially wealthy Ashkenazism over Palestinians. What happened?
Your signal was running out.
Oh no.
So you can just leave and come back if you want.
No, I think
that helps.
It's there we go. Let's make
good?
sure it stays. I think it
did it.
It's okay. I can read it though. It'll clear up in a second.
Okay.
So current Israeli aggression towards Palestinians is an outgrowth of long-held Israeli policies that privilege Jews, especially wealthy Ashkenazism of Palestinians, but tens of millions of Christian Zionists constitute the global movement supporting, instigating, and pushing the expansion of Israeli state control over the Holy Land at whatever cost.
Okay.
While Christian Zionist movements largely outpace Jewish Zionist movements in their numbers as well as in their extremist authoritarian views, the two movements continue to use one another for their own gain. As many Jewish Zionists hail Balfour, an avid anti-Semite, as a hero, they are happy to overlook the anti-Semitism of Christian Zionists to bolster the shared vision of an apartheid Jewish supremacist state in historic Palestine. For example, even when U.S. politicians distance themselves from John Hagee over his overtly anti-Semitic views, the ADL remains silent. The alignment of establishment Jewish organizations with right-wing anti-Semitic Christian organizations for the benefit of the Israeli right wing is dangerous for progressive movements in Palestine, the United States, and around the world.
Okay.
Indeed, Christian Zionism must be challenged as a powerful threat to a larger progressive agenda, because Christian Zionism is predicated on Christian salvation coinciding with the end of the world and annihilation of non-Christians. Christian Zionism is at its core anti-Muslim and anti-Semitic. The anti-Muslim sentiments of many Christian Zionist leaders are often overt and indisputable. Prominent figures such as Hagee, Chuck Pierce, and Pat Robinson have referred to Islam as satanic and the devil, and are key actors in the U.S. anti-Muslim industry. On the other hand, Zionists use their unwavering support of the state of Israel rooted in theosemitism, the fetishization and objectification of Jews, to make it seem that they care for Jews while using Jews as pawns in their anti-drama and believing Jews are ultimately damned to hell. More broadly, many Christian Zionist communities adhere to a larger Christian right agenda, fighting against abortion and LGBTQ rights, contradicting any claims that they care for peace and freedom.
My freedoms.
To overlook the impact of Christian Zionism on the ongoing colonization of Palestine is to overlook the original and largest worldwide movement seeking full Jewish control in Palestine, and one of the largest and most consequential anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, and anti-democratic movements of our time. Christian Zionism has informed Western policy on Palestine since at least the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and continues to be the backbone of global support for ongoing occupation, apartheid, and displacement. Progressives committed to Palestinian rights and liberation, as well as Muslim and Jewish safety, will be limited as long as they fail to directly challenge this behemoth of a movement. Any thoughts on this?
Nope. Sounds about like what I was talking about earlier, right?
Right.
So yep, Balfour, all the fun names that we all remember.
But yeah, so I think this kind of shows, so it's not just AIPAC that we should be worried about, is the Christian Zionist lobby as well. And it doesn't get mentioned in the news at all. Like, I think in giving that, not to say AIPAC isn't like an issue, they are, but if AIPAC didn't exist, then a lot of these Christian Zionist organizations will continue to exist. And because they give money through churches, that money is not necessarily, it's a little more overt in terms of, the spending that they can use in order to, essentially bring Jesus back. What is all said and done. So anyway, we talked a little bit about the imperialistic bend of Christian Zionism. So this is a lecture that Reverend Dr. Munford Isaac gave. I'm not sure when he did this. You might know him like during over Christmas when there was a drone strike that hit that church. That was the church that he speaks at. So he was the one that gave that Christmas sermon back in December. This is the guy that is going to be speaking now. So he's going to talk more about Christian Zionism, but he's going to talk more about the imperialist and colonialization aspect of this ideology as it refers to Christians. So so let's go into it a little bit. We're not going to play the whole thing. I think 10 minutes of it. And then we can continue to talk about it from there.
Cool. Action.
Presentation. So Christian Zionism defined, if you wish to get a straightforward definition, I like Robert Smith's definition in his book, More Desire Than Our Own Salvation. It is political action informed by specifically Christian commitments to promote or preserve Jewish control over the geographic area now comprising Israel and Palestine. I like this definition because it reminds us that we're talking not simply about a theological
I know it's kind of low,
or a theological school, but about a political movement, a political action. And when it comes to how this political movement functions, Stephen Sizer, in one of his books, identifies at least these 6 ways in which Christian Zionists act on behalf of Israel or support Israel by political lobbying on behalf of Israel. And as I said, this has been very much manifested during the Trump presidency, which was fueled by the support of evangelicals, and one of their tenets was the support for Israel. And this was translated to political decisions like the movement of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And one of Trump's famous quotes about this, when he said, "I did it for the evangelicals, I didn't do it for Israel." Just think of that. They support and finance Jewish immigration to the land, which, when you pause a little bit again to think of it from a Palestinian perspective, these are my sisters and brothers donating money for people to come from outside of my land, take my land, and have more rights than the rights I have in my land. So to us Palestinians, this is just mind-boggling. Support the settlements politically and financially. This is well documented, and one of the shocking figures is how much money goes from churches to settlement projects. And we're not talking about thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of millions, and in some cases, but lots of money is going to Israeli settlements. Settlements that most diplomats recognize as the main obstacle to peace and to the two-state solution. Obviously, they oppose the division of Jerusalem and, again, the movement of the embassy. Some radicals support the rebuilding of the temple, and this will have catastrophic results. And most oppose any peace process and any giving of the land to the Palestinians, which they see as a compromise. Of course, they're sitting at the comfort of their offices and defining reality for us. What's common, again, in the DNA of Christian Zionism is that we are missing as Palestinians. We are ignored at best and dehumanized at worst. This is the kind of one of the most common things I see among Christian Zionists. They act as if the land is empty, as if Israel was created on an empty land. This is seen in the infamous slogan that this.
Yep.
So he brings up what we've talked about is and I think this is kind of the problem that I know with many Zionists, at least online, like when they kind of go into, like they had a right to take the land. Like it was based on the idea of them thinking, oh, it was empty or uninhabitable. Like again, like Zionists were proposing East Africa to be Israel. But again, that was the same argument was, oh, there's no one living there. Like the fuck? There were people living there. It's so yeah, I think that's, and no one's necessarily saying it, but it's the idea of, I think just given what Zionists say online is they never talk about Palestinians. They're always ignored or not mentioned at all. And so it doesn't necessarily compute with them in terms of when people are, advocating for them. It's almost like you're advocating in a way. I think in their mind, it's like you're advocating for people that don't exist, essentially. At least that's kind of the tone I get from many people who are pro-Israel. It's the idea of, yeah, we have a right to land. Like no one was living there, but then like, oh, those people that you care about, what's their deal? Why do you care about them so much?
Right.
So yeah, I think just the idea of Zionists, or at least the initial belief was the land was empty and ours for the taking. That's kind of the core, one of the core aspects of Zionism that I think for both Jews and Christians that, is very subtle in terms of how people talk about it, but it's there. You can go ahead.
Zionists promoted, which many Christian leaders in Britain in particular promoted before Zionism was birthed. The idea of a land without people for a people without a land, which before that was a country without a nation for a nation without a country. And the main premise here is that the land was empty. But too well the land was not empty. Actually, they knew too well the land was not empty. And in the case of the British mandate, it's not just the Balfour Declaration, everything related to it. They knew too well that the land was not empty because you occupied us.
Mm-hmm.
Yet still our land was described as a land without people, because as Ben White put it in his book, yes, they knew that the land has people, but for them, the Palestinians, were a complete irrelevance. For the Zionists, Palestine was empty, not literally, but in terms of people of equal worth to the incoming settlers. This is a typical colonial mentality, and dare I say, a typical colonial Christian mentality. Yes, the land has people, but they can be shifted. We can control their fate. And today, we still hear the idea, why don't you go to Jordan? Today, we still hear debates like this. Do Jews have a divine right to Israel's land? Where a discussion is made about our land, they call it Israel's land, but we are continually ignored in such discussions. This is an example of a discussion in Christianity Today. The two authors are an American leader and a Messianic Jewish American leader sitting at the comfort of their offices, discussing our land as if it's empty. And, what about our perspective? But you see, our perspective does not matter. That's the issue. And by the way, in this case, I actually emailed Christianity Today saying, can I respond? At the time, I was still writing my PhD on the topic. And I lived in this land. But that didn't give me the merit in their eyes to actually be part of the conversation. Why? Because we don't matter. Yes, the land has people. They knew that, but it doesn't matter. Because true understanding of the Bible and righteous acts come from us. That's the whole nation. To me, this is the original war, in that we are invisible in theology books. We don't exist. We are invisible in the language of the church. I call this the myth of returning to an empty land. That's the myth that many, if not most Christians simply assume. If you ask them about Palestinians, they probably don't know, not only that, much about us, but they're shocked to know Palestinian Christians exist. And at best, they describe the idea of Israel creating a Garden of Eden in the middle of the desert. It was an empty land. The idea of returning, again, puts me as a Palestinian in the wrong place. It's as if I have occupied someone else's land, even though this is the land of our ancestors. The same applies, by the way, to how most pilgrims today, when they come to the Holy Land, spend at best 2 hours in Bethlehem. Why? Because, again, we don't exist. And if we exist in their mind, we are the dangerous, backward people on the other side of the wall. People to be feared, people to be dehumanized. And in the mentality of the wall, those we isolate or separate to the other side of the wall, because they, in their understanding, brought it to themselves, they're terrorists, they're radical Islam, and so on. You can stereotype whatever way you want. And actually, you can then justify all acts of violence against them. That is the mentality. That's what I mean by a colonial DNA or a colonial theology. When you look at Palestinians as less humans. I'm going to unpack this more now as I looked at certain elements in the theology of Christian Zionism and try to illustrate it by certain example. And so let's look at now what I mean precisely by that idea of imperial theology. First of all, we have the whole employment of God. It's not simply that we're talking about a chosen people, a theological principle. Now it's even a chosen state. God is on Israel's side. And as such, we must be on the right side and stand with Israel because we want to stand with God. This is how one Christian Zionist leaders, and one of the most influential in the 80s, put it. To stand against Israel is to stand against God. It's plain simple. We believe that history and scripture prove that God deals with nations in relation to how they deal with Israel. You see how God here is brought to a struggle. And it's shocking to me how when the same Western Christendom criticizes or challenges, calls out Islam for making conflict religious and using religion in politics, they're perfectly fine applying the same principles on Israel, making the conflict a religious conflict. This is when the conflict was made religious. And so anything we do is opposing God. As I said in this article that I mentioned, do Jews have a divine right? Because what if the answer to such a question is, yes, Jews have a divine right to the land? Where does that leave me as a Palestinian? Can I object? You see, if I object that statement, I would be standing against God. And that's the whole essence of Christian Zionism. In that mentality, the world is divided into us versus them. And them is the Arab Muslims, in this case, are to be feared. Instilling fear is one of the most powerful tools of Christian Zionism. They always, for example, exaggerate the threat of the Arab countries. They always use, for example, there are 250 million Arabs just waiting to destroy Israel. And of course, that myth was put aside, at least for a moment, with the so-called peace deals between Israel and the Arab states. Iran becomes then the enemy, and even many Christian Zionist leaders called for nuking Iran or bombing Iran because of that, because they characterize the other as to be feared. And that's all of this comes from a position of privilege, where we act as if we're superior to others. I call this, assuming that there are us and them, where the Judeo-Christian tradition is superior to everything else, especially in this case to Islam. And that's really the essence of that term, how at least it is used by many, the whole idea of a Judeo-Christian tradition as we are superior to others.
Yeah. So, Reverend Isaac calls it out. It's basically the supremacy of it all, the caucasity of it all, but but more important, but it's the idea of we're better than you, like, or essentially our religion is superior than yours. And I feel like saying without saying that many people believe still that Islam is such a backwards religion. So the people that practice it do not matter. So, but it's the idea of, again, using religion in a way that Christianity was used to justify slavery for me and my family, to justify, taking over. Like, it just basically, as we've said on the show before, it's manifest destiny for the Jews, essentially.
Yeah.
This is exactly what this reminds me of.
I mean, pretty much. I mean, it's practically the same phrasing. What is it, from the Sinai to the Nile? That kind of thing. The Euphrates.
Mm-hmm.
I always miss. So anyway, is your birthday coming up? People need to give you birthday bucks. Birthday bucks at ko-fi.com/indie-news-network. Or scan the QR code on your screen, or put the exclamation mark donate in the chat. Give him some birthday money to do what he wants with. Why not? If you can't do that, but he'll take birthday wishes in the comment section below. Tell him happy birthday. Put like and subscribe. He'll take that too. Share it. He'll like that. So, any questions? No? Good.
Not a question. I would like at least one new person to subscribe to us before we're out of here tonight.
Yep.
So
sounds.
Who are these people?
We've been having this on the back burner, this story, for a minute, and I figured it was time, because a few of our brothers and sisters made some unusual statements, especially after Macklemore's song came out. So I figured we'd pull both these together. So, we have Anya here. Macklemore claims AIPAC and Kufi are part of a system of white supremacy. First of all, bro, you're white. Second of all, those groups don't exist to promote white supremacy. Israel is not based on white supremacy. It's based on Zionism. Anya, I don't know if you know, but those are kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
So
it's it's in umbrella. It's in the spectrum.
Well, I think her point. I think her point was that they hate more than just, like, they hate other white people. And it's like, I hate to tell you, but as a person who got those KKK flyers, those white supremacists, they hate other white people too. Like that's how this works.
Don't forget, like, KKK, they were Protestants. They hated Catholics.
Yes.
So,
and Irish and Italians and Jews and,
and Slavs. And basically anyone who is not...
anyone who wasn't
basically
Southern
anyone who
white
is not
Baptist.
Western European.
Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah.
If you weren't British or French, they hated your guts. So...
And same thing with the Zionists, seeing how most of them are Europeans to begin with. Especially now. So we weren't the only ones saying this kind of stuff, right? But she continues, the Zionists love that pro-Palestinian students think the problem is white supremacy and that Chad frat boys feel like everyone believes they are the problem. In the meantime, Zionists squander the future of both these student groups and keep us all divided. I get where you're going. Just unnecessary, Anya, I feel like.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't care what those other people think of my white supremacy labeling on white supremacy. Like, I don't, the optics.
What do you say?
Don't matter in that regard.
What do you say at the end of our show every week?
Labels are bad. Because they can be co-opted and misinterpreted and whatever. Like, I feel you. Trust me, Anya, I feel you. But, Jay Buffont, we want more white people to call out white supremacy. That's how you help change the system. Also, Zionism is part of white supremacy. Need we remind you of how Zionists treat Ethiopian Jews? This guy, Colin, says, Max, come get your girl. Zionism is a branch of white supremacy. Kimber Maddox, Zionism is a white supremacist ideology. There's a reason so many non-Jewish white Americans support it. Regardless, I'm curious why you believe white people can't call out white supremacy. That makes absolutely no sense.
No sense. But that's the thing. And that's why I was sharing with you before we went live. This whole thread, because she went in all through today on this subject. This was all stemmed from Macklemore, of all things.
And I'm one to remember, Colin, when the Gray Zone was praising the likes of Oliver Anthony for weeks. I got blocked by a guy because of it. You know, so where's he being white? Where's Roger Waters being white supporting Macklemore on this? How much money he give the Gray Zone? I mean, if we're going to talk, like, he's speaking about Palestine too, calling it white supremacist. Where's your ire over that?
Right.
Like,
and even within another thing, Anya was like, "Oh, well, we need white people." I think she might have saw JB Street and tried to
backpedal a little,
it back a bit, possibly. Like, but she was like, "Oh, we need white people to call out Zionism." Then why are you fucking around on Macklemore for?
Yeah.
Like, I just feel that there was a lot more to what she might have been thinking in her head before she tweeted it out. Like,
friend of the show, Nico House. I don't know enough about Kufi, but I know enough about AIPAC to know their existence has zero to do with protecting African black Jews, even though they pay off a few black politicians. So he's definitely onto something that they're here to uplift and promote the superiority of a specific type of Zionist. Yeah, no, race is absolutely part and the beginning of this problem. So she replies to Nico. Yes, well, that's his chicken and egg, right? Is it class? Is it racism? It's kind of the same thing all the time. So she writes, those are two U.S. orgs that exist to influence the U.S. on behalf of Israel and Zionism. Bill Ackman is a Zionist donor, not a white supremacist donor. I would argue you could claim that, though, can't you? You know, Zionist privilege does not extend to all whites, and not all white people can make Ayah. And Zionists have non-Zionist white Christians, hate non-Zionist white Christians. And yes, the Europeans who founded Israel don't view black Jews as equal, because they invented a narrative that places all of us, black, brown, or white, below them. Just like any other white supremacist group, Anya. They all do that.
Right.
Like, it's us versus them mentality. That's how it starts. So, let's go back, Colin. Let's take it back. When was this published in Consortium News? Originally published November 28th of 2012.
The wrong damn date. Yeah.
That's how far it goes back. Okay, they republished this like a couple weeks ago, right? So this is by Lawrence Davidson, who writes Origins of Israel's Anti-Arab Racism. The anti-Arab racism that pervades modern Israel can be traced back to attitudes of old European imperialism, argued Lawrence Davidson in 2012, in this prescient forecast of today's Israeli genocide. Okay? So, we're going to start here. We're going to go way back to the middle of the 19th century. The multi-ethnic empire was on its way out as the dominant political paradigm in Europe, replacing it with the nation-state, a political form which allowed the concentration of ethnic groups within their own political borders. This, in turn, formed cultural and racial incubators for an us superior versus them inferior nationalism that would underpin most of the West's future wars. Many of these nation states were also imperial powers expanding across the globe, and of course, their state-based chauvinistic outlook went with them. Do I hear Manifest Destiny in the chat, anyone?
Yes.
And what it did to the native populations here?
Right.
And I don't know, Africa, India, any of those things, right? So again, the multi-ethnic empire was on its way out, right? We wanted Europeans controlling things, right? So this guy, Hungarian Theodor Herzl, you heard of this guy?
Well, yes, we have.
With his lovely beard and mustache. So Zionism was born in the milieu of nationalism and imperialism, both of which left an incredible mark on the character and ambitions of the Israeli state. The conviction of none other than Theodor Herzl, modern Zionism's founding father, was that the centuries of anti-Semitism were proof positive that Europe's Jews could not be assimilated into mainstream Western society. They could not only be safe if they possessed a nation state of their own, right? That was his...
They could always be safe.
Yes, right. So this was in turn when we were hearing members of his own Hungarian people that they were saying the Palestinians should go, the Jews should go to Palestine, get out, pretty much, right?
Well,
as well as
out.
Nazis also said the same thing.
Right.
So this conversation also reflected the European imperial sentiments of the day. It's like the Nazis. They also didn't like other white people. I don't know if you remember,
Right.
It wasn't just, Jews they hated.
Right. They hated Slavs, I believe. They hated
Poles,
Gypsies,
Russians for sure.
Poles.
So yeah. This conviction also reflected the European imperial sentiments of the day. The founders of modern Zionism were both Jews and Europeans, and as such had acquired the West's cultural sense of superiority in relation to non-Europeans. The sense of superiority would play an important role when a deal, the Balfour Declaration, was struck in 1917 between the World Zionist Org and the British government. The deal stipulated that in exchange for Zionist support for the British war effort, World War I was in progress, the British would, assuming victory, help create a Jewish national home in Palestine. There was no oversight.
We talked about this. Right. Sorry. We talked about this. That's the reason because the Zionists had the money.
Yes.
And the British needed to ensure that they won the war because their funding was running out. So that was what was done in exchange. You fund us to make sure we win this, and we'll give you the land that you want. Right.
So in Palestine, it was no oversight that neither side in this bargain gave much thought to the Palestinians' native population. Years later, beginning in 1945, at the end of World War II, the British were forced to officially give up their imperial point of view. They came out of the war with a population burdened by extraordinary high war taxes. Retaining the empire would keep those taxes high, and so the British voter elected politicians who would transform the empire into a commonwealth, granting independence to just about all Britain's overseas territories. One of those territories was what? Palestine. It is interesting to note that in other European colonies where large numbers of Europeans resided, the era following World War II saw their eventual evacuation as power shifted over to the natives. Kenya and Algeria are examples which show that this process was hard and bloody, but it happened. And when it did happen, the official imperial mindset was defeated. That does not mean that all Europeans saw the light and ceased to be racist, but their government eventually saw the necessity to stop acting that way. Unfortunately, in the case of Palestine, the process of decolonization never occurred. In this case, the European colonists did not want the imperial mother country to stay and protect them. They wanted them out so they could set up shop of their own. They got their chance after the British evacuated in 1947, Soon thereafter, the Zionists began executing a prepared plan to conquer the Holy Land and chase away or subjugate the native population, and what of the imperial point of view, which saw the European as superior and the native as inferior. This became institutionalized in the practices of the new Israeli state. That made Israel one of the very few, the other being apartheid South Africa, self-identified Western nation states to continue to implement old-style imperial policies. They discriminated against the Palestinian population in every way imaginable, pushed them into enclosed areas of concentration, and sought to control their lives in great detail. One wants to know what this meant for the evolving character of Israel's citizenry, who now would live out the colonial drama as an imperial power in their own right. One might take a look at the book by Sven Lindqvist entitled Exterminate All the Brutes, New Press, 1996. This work convincingly shows that lording it over, often resisting native peoples, debasing and humiliating them, regularly killing or otherwise punishing them when they protest, leads the colonials to develop genocidal yearnings. There is evidence that the Zionists who created and now sustain Israel suffer from this process. For a long time, Israeli government officials tried genocide via a thought experiment. They went about asserting that the Palestinians did not exist. The most famous case of this was Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, who on June 15, 1969, claimed that there were no such thing as Palestinians. They do not exist. One of the reasons she gave for this option was that the Arabs of Palestine never had their own nation state, which is just wrong. Others took a different approach by denying not so much the existence of Palestinians, but rather their humanity. At various times and in various contexts, usually in response to acts of resistance against occupation, Israeli leaders have referred to the Palestinians as beasts walking on two legs. That's Menachem Begin, right? Grasshoppers, Yitzhak Shamir, crocodiles, Ehud Barak, and cockroaches, Rafael Aitan. We've heard these very many times in regards to these things. So, of course, these sentiments were not confined to the Israeli leadership. They soon pervaded most of the Zionist population because the old imperial superiority inferiority propaganda had become a core element of their base education. The Israelis have taught their children the important point of view, augmented it with biased media reporting. Yes. What did I say? Hopefully not impartial. The imperial point of view, augmented it with biased media reporting, labeled the inevitable resistance offered by the Palestinians as anti-Semitism, and took it as proof of the need to suppress and control the population of others. And we've talked about what they teach their children on this show before. What do we call that segment? Do you remember? I forget. I brought it. But anyway, it's somewhere on the channel. So, and from the Zionist standpoint, this entire process has worked.
It's the education one. One of the education ones. I forget. I know it's education.
Something like that, right? So, this entire process has worked remarkably well. Today, all but a handful of Israeli Jews dislike and fear the people they conquered and displaced. They wish they would go away, and when the resistance was just a bit too much to bear, they are now quite willing to see them put out of the way. Thus, during the latest, this was in 2012, round of resistance rocket fire from Gaza and the vengeful killing that came from the Israeli side, we heard the following.
But Reef.
I know, October 7th, I know.
I thought everything started to October 7th.
October 7th.
Of last year.
Yeah, last year. It was the only time. So again, 2012, right? They said, we must blow Gaza back to the Middle Ages, destroying all the infrastructure, including roads and water. Colin, what are they doing now?
Just that.
Yeah. So they continued, there should be no electricity in Gaza, no gasoline or moving vehicles, nothing. We need to flatten entire neighborhoods, flatten all of Gaza. Journalist Gilad Sharon in the Jerusalem Post.
I mean, it's just as if they manifested everything that they spoke into resistance that is happening right now.
Yeah. So members of the Knesset, there are no innocents in Gaza. Mow them down. Kill the Gazans without thought or mercy. Again, 2012. Gaza should be bombed so hard the population has to flee to Egypt. Israel Katz, present Minister of Transportation. Gaza should be wiped clean with bombs. Avi Ditcher, present Minister of Home Front Defense. Israel soldiers must learn from the Syrians how to slaughter the enemy. Prominent Israeli Rabbi Yaakov Yosef. Finally, there were the numerous spontaneous demonstrations of ordinary Israeli citizens, both in the north and south of the country, where it could be heard chants and shouts such as, "They don't deserve to live, they need to die, may your children die, kick out all the Arabs."
Honestly, Reeve, that should be a short.
Yeah.
All of that part right there should be a short because it makes it, because it gives credence to what people have been saying regarding how Palestinians have been viewed this whole time, that people are either in denial or just plain straight up lying about. But this is people within government is saying this, you know? And so, like, kind of going back to Anya's thing, like, because the argument that I was making with her is that Zionism is not necessarily a religious ideology per se. Like, Herschel was not, he was an atheist according to many things. So it's like, you all can argue, and definitely back then, it was more political. It was based on imperialism and capital. Like, Zionists had the money, they wanted had the money and wanted to retake Palestine over, but they used Judaism as a means to do that. So, you know, so for me, it's just like, I have a hard time even saying Jewish supremacy in a sense, because it gives the idea, seemingly, that all Jews think this way, which we know is definitely not the case. But it does fall in line in what can be considered under white supremacy in terms of, you know, that shield that you can have. Like, again, you know, but generally for European Jews, you don't have to say you're Jewish, right? Like, you don't necessarily have to bend your identity based on the fact that you're Jewish unless you say so. Like, I don't have that shield. You know, it's very obvious what I am. And from that, I'm already identified as inferior. Like, Jews in this day and age don't have to go through that necessarily, unless they have more melanin. And even then, that's not even a guarantee for them, you know, even if they're Jewish. So it's the willingness to play ball with the systematic institution that is white supremacy. That is the problem. That's the issue that I had with Anya calling it Jewish supremacy. So, it is that, but it's to a larger degree within that scope, within that spectrum of using that institution as a means to get what you want. It's just a matter of them using the religion to hijack it in a way that to justify their moves.
You know about taxonomy? You've done some, right? The classification of living things, right? You know, you got your order, phylum, species, all that stuff, right? So my mother's a biologist, right? Has been doing this in the field for a long time. There are two, right, groups in taxonomy: lumpers and separators, right? So, like, let's say you find a new species of shrimp, right? Do you lump it in with a previous species, right? or do you separate it as a new species? That was, I think, what Anya was dealing with. Was like, do I separate this as something separate? Or do I lump it in with white supremacy, even though that's what it is? Like, or do I try to separate it because it is different? Like, I get the argument in your head, just not needed, you know?
But as you said, it's not so different compared to Nazism, Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
Like, it's the idea of superiority. And in this case, over people of color to justify, you know, them overtaking you because they essentially think of you as a less than. So it's that European mindset of literally it kind of along the lines of Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am type deal.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like my presence as this white person is more significant than yours.
Yeah.
As a person of color. So yeah, I mean, I get what she was trying to do.
Yeah.
But it kind of fell flat. But again, it kind of fell flat as to the reason why.
Right. Like, I get you feeling why you feel like that's dismissive. And I also, Anya, see you underneath people saying that burning the American flag is dismissive. Yes, it is. And do you know why? Because there's a lot of us who are anti-American at this point. We do not like what our country is doing. Like, we just don't. We live here. It doesn't mean we are completely patriotic, whatever. And if anyone wants to argue with me on it, feel free. I'll give you a long list of why you should not be happy about our country. Like, you know, that scroll's going to be pretty fucking long. So if people are out here wanting to burn the fucking flag, I get that shit. I completely understand that shit. You know, so, like, I get why you feel like optics are important, but I think the optics of dead babies is a lot more prevalent and a lot more of a problem. So, you know, like, while I get you, you know, I feel like you're tone policing and it's unnecessary. But back to this article from 2012, if it wasn't for the fact the outside world was watching, and this is just a funny paragraph because we now know better, right? If it wasn't for the fact that the outside world was watching, there can be little doubt that the famed Israeli armed forces would have been tempted to do all that these ministers, clerics, and citizens wished, which they are now doing, with us watching. Today, look in a paragraph, today the outside world is having little effect on Western government support for the ongoing genocide. After Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to a ceasefire in 2012, you're wondering why he didn't do one now, right? So a group of Israeli soldiers showed their frustration by using their bodies to spell out in Hebrew the words "Bibi loser." Right? It was a pre-arranged photo op, and the picture can now easily be found on the web. What seems to really irk the Israeli citizenry is not that Bibi killed and maimed too many innocent civilians, but rather that he did not kill and maim enough of them to grant Israelis safety and security. So, you know, here you go. Soldiers spell out PM is a loser. So, you know, I think that's why they're, you know, why we're pushed to blame Bibi in this, right? So, you know, and his own people will be pushed into that, and they'll blame him, especially if he votes for a ceasefire, right? So, throughout history, it has been standard operating procedure to demonize those you fight and demote to inferior status those you conquer. But as Linkovitz's work shows, there was something different about the way Europeans went about this. The deeply racist outlook that underlay modern imperialism made it particularly perverse. Now that apartheid South Africa is no more, the Israelis are the last surviving heirs to that dreadful heritage. So much for a light onto the nations that proposition has quite failed. Wherever the Israelis and their Zionist cohorts are leading us, it is not into the light, it is to some place very, very dark. And we're now in that darkness. So, any closing thoughts before we head out of this segment?
Well, again, I'm glad. Thank you for bringing that article, but I think it's just a reminder, just as far as where Zionism came from. Like, this is coming from the continent that, like, put my ancestors in chains.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's like the idea that these European, like, this is all kind of building upon capitalism at the end of the day. The issue with slavery, in the West is that it became a business. See, that's what I'm kind of simplifying it, but basically that's what it was. Like, people argue, oh, like, Arabs had slaves and like people had yes, but that was more
every culture in the
mentioned this on
fucking planet had them.
Every culture had, but then you can argue that was more or less of indentured servitude. That was when, like, you conquered people, like,
it was
and
war.
then you just
it was spoils of war.
Right.
Like, you took the able-bodied men that you conquered, and they then worked for you. Like,
work for you.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
But
in a lot of these cases, but when then that became a business, that's when things became a problem. So,
right. Like, profit. Like, not for them, not for me or like my family or like, for ADOS or whatever, like, or within the diaspora. So this is but again, this is kind of like the seeds of what was Zionism stem from this idea. So, wherever right. And that's what I think people should realize is that this is what Zionism is based upon. Is it based upon a lot of these ideas that essentially, like, brought Black people to the West on account of slavery or account, as you kind of alluded to, Native Americans essentially been genocided off, in the name of manifest destiny, or like in the name of religious freedom, like for the Pilgrims or whatever. It's like what we're currently seeing now, like in Papua New Guinea? Like, you did a story
still
about
ongoing.
that, I think, over a year ago.
Yep.
Still
Paradise
ongoing
Pond.
right now, which no one is even talking about that either.
Yeah.
So, but these are all based upon the ideas and like kind of like from the Enlightenment era within the West in terms of basically white people feeling themselves and then just being like, I'm hot shit and I can do whatever I want and fuck everybody else. And the issue that I have with this in terms of Judaism, or basically all the Abrahamic religions at their core, if you're looking at it from a holistic, they're meant to be religions of peace. So,
well, they're
as a Jew,
by the way, Zionism in and of itself, we haven't really talked about this in general as far as how other Jews depict it. In their teachings, they are not allowed to have a nation state until their Messiah shows up.
Right.
Like, but Zionism argued, no, we got to have it before then. No, your book tells you that that's not the way this works. So.
Right. But I think on a basic level, if you're talking about a religion of peace, why, but you're kind of it's like, so intertwined. Zionism at this point is somewhat intertwined with Judaism. Like, why would you want to be a part of a religion that is essentially, giving carte blanche to the massacre of thousands of children in the name of quote unquote Judaism, in the name of, which it's not necessarily interpreted that way, but it can be. Like, why would you want to be a part of a religion like that if that's what essentially, like, in the leanings of a nation built around a religion? Like, that's what you want to be stood for?
You mean like
that's what
the
you
Vatican?
want to be known for.
You mean like the Vatican?
Yes.
because it is also one of those religions. Yeah,
same thing.
All of them. Pick one. You know
what that's why I'm saying, like, in a holistic view, but like how we as human beings interpret that, like, we make a whole mess of it. But those are the conversations that I don't think people are necessarily having.
Well, and even the fucking prominent atheists who should be on this shit, frontwards, backwards, sideways, have eaten up the propaganda on all this shit. So, that's my issue as a fucking atheist in the South. I've had plenty of these fucking battles over Christianity and its Zionism, right? Like, let alone, that was Iraq War, that was Iran, that was Afghanistan. We were having those arguments. So, like, there's a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to religion and that shit. So, that's the way I feel about it. But, yeah, I definitely wanted to bring this to cover a bit about, we probably should do a thing on Herschel himself, right? And,
yes,
it's hard to find stuff that isn't completely propaganda on that guy, but, we'll look into that maybe, and the, Russia's involvement with all that shit and things like that. But in the meantime, talking about these things means we get demonetized and censored and suppressed. So, if you could help us out by going to ko-fi.com/Indie News Network and giving us the $2 you would normally give to Starbucks that you're boycotting right now, that would be nice. Scan that little QR code on your screen and give us a couple of $1 dues. We appreciate that. But if you can't do that, very easy. Like, subscribe, share this with your friends. We are heavily suppressed. The more you can get this to like-minded people, the better. Leaving comments supposedly helps the algorithm, so do some of that too. Let us know what you think. But, otherwise, go to alternative platforms to find us, which you can find at indienews.network. You can subscribe to our Rockford and Rumble pages in case YouTube decides to completely boost us. You can find us there.